Getting a picture on the TV. I'm going to step off the limb now. That's one small step for man, a giant leap for mankind.
Hello and welcome to everyone joining us from France, the United States, and around the world. Welcome to this next installment of JadaTalks for Paris Art Week. I am your host, Samuel Locher, joined again with Dana Blickensderfer and the Reverend Dr. Christopher J. Benek. Christopher J. Benek is a pastor, a follower of Jesus Christ, a husband, and a father. He is a global emerging tech and theology expert who is internationally known for his social and religious analysis and commentary. He is widely recognized as a techno-theologian, futurist, ethicist, Christian transhumanist, public speaker, writer, and tech pastor. He is the lead clergy expert regarding artificial intelligence in the world. And today, we are going to be talking about future imaginaries, a deeply human approach to the age of singularity. So, some of the biggest technological innovations of the 21st century are set to make their debut in the 2020s, namely brain-machine interfaces that will augment human intelligence with artificial intelligence. Many fear that these innovations will come at the cost of our humanity and usher us into an age of technological singularity. The big question is, how do we maintain our humanity while incorporating cybernetic augmentations, and what role does the artist play in this? So, Christopher, we had mentioned before in some of our previous conversations that our viewers might not be privy to, that although things like Neuralink with Elon Musk are in the works, you don't necessarily believe that brain machine interfaces kind of live up to the hype that's surrounding them right now, correct?
Right. I mean, I think part of the misnomer about technology is it's fun to think about where we're going because there are really exciting places that we are going, but it's often overstated the current potential with these technologies in order to build some hype, and some of that has to do with the practical realities of funding, which I'm sure artists understand. There's a whole process to fundraising. There's a whole process to getting this technology going. It's important to support it, but for example, something like Neuralink, if you pay attention to what Elon Musk is talking about, when he's talking about what could be, he's talking about years out and potential. He's not talking about practically what is. Right now, Neuralink, as I understand it, is focusing on reparative functions in people. And so the goal right now for that interface is to be able to restore function that we might have had before. It's effectively to allow our bodies to do what they already could have or should have been able to do biologically. What that doesn't speak to is it doesn't speak to the potential of what we might become in the future. And I think that's where it gets really interesting. And we start to see folks who spur on our imaginations, like Ray Kurzweil, who is an AI expert for Google now, but Ray is a serial entrepreneur and inventor. And he has posited concepts like the singularity, which have been popularized now more and more. And the concept behind the singularity is effectively that we are eventually able to create something that has autonomy and self-awareness and is sentient as far as an artificial intelligent agent. And then once we're able to create something smarter than we are, it's able to create something smarter than it is. And what happens is what we've seen an exponential increase in technology. We've seen this for generations now. Moore's law, particularly as it pertains to computer chips, is something that's stated over and over that, and even then, the science behind Moore's law isn't always followed exactly when we see it and we see it in kind of the public realm. But what we can see, and we know as a matter of fact, is we can see exponential growth happening, right? So when I was a kid, you would grab a telephone, you would grab it off of the wall. It had a long cord that was your leash. You would, wait for people to, ring you. And if you missed the call, you didn't know who called you. And there was a whole game about going back and forth. Now, we have, cell phones that are mini computers. And realistically, the computing power in a phone like this that Kurzweil would talk about this exponential growth, used to fill up whole rooms at MIT. Whole buildings would be filled up. And so what happens is we see this exponential growth happening in humanity. And once we're able to create something smarter than we are, and it is hypothetically able to create something smarter than it is, then we get this function that they borrow this term from physics, where effectively we have the singularity, which starts going from this and it goes to an exponential. And you see a curve. And what we don't know is we don't know what the potential of that is. So what it causes us to do is it causes us to look at the future and to think about the future, which is something that I think technologists, theologians, artists all do in their work as they project out the future. And we have to kind of think about that in the context of our present. And in the context of our present, what I would suggest is that there are three types of. Now, I'm working from I'm a pastor of a church here in downtown Miami, and so kind of my framework is I work from a theological framework on things, and I know that's not everyone's framework. There are plenty of different positions. There are lots of different theological positions. Mine happens to be the Christian tradition, but what I identify in public spheres as far as influence and interaction are three types of theology that we see. And those three types of theology, the first one, we're in the middle of a election cycle right now in the United States. So the first one's on full display for everyone to see. It's what I call supremacy theology. And that's kind of it's my way or the highway position. Nothing, if you look at the political debates in the United States, nothing that the other person says is ever right. There's no compromise. You either do it my way or get out kind of thing. And that's become kind of a popular theology of fundamentalism. It's become popular in a lot of places as far as kind of thinking about the future. We're gonna implement the future the way I want the future to be. The second type is escapism theology. This we actually hear, and actually it's fascinating because we've seen a pivot in Elon Musk's thinking in his time in the public sphere, and part of that is to begin with, Elon Musk was really worried about AI. Now, I'm not as worried about AI, actually. I'm a techno-optimist, and I actually have, I think there's a positive result for artificial intelligence. But yes, go ahead.
Well, with regards, I'm glad you talked about AI. We have a comment with regards, because a lot of our viewers are also in the makers and creatives in the art space.
Yes.
Ray Kurzweil built a computer that composed classical music. What's your take on AI, art, development, imaginary? Where do you see that going?
Well, it actually plays into what I'm talking about. So it's perfect. That's actually the question's right on track. So Kurzweil, like I said, he's serial inventor, right? So he created the Kurzweil keyboard that you see everywhere. He's created a lot of things. And in one of the earliest videos of Ray Kurzweil, there's a great documentary called The Transcendent Man on Kurzweil's life, and it starts out with this video where he's on like a TV show, almost like a contestant, and he's showing this little invention, which is a little computer, and he's a young person at that point. But what we see folks like, and Kurzweil hasn't done this. Kurzweil's more of an optimist on things, but folks like Musk have seen the development of tech and they get worried about it. And so what we see someone like Elon Musk say, Elon Musk went to literally the governor's conference in the United States. He was petitioning authorities on artificial intelligence development. He really tried to have impact in the political sphere, where I've actually done some work with AI and kind of how politicians are doing. And politicians, frankly, don't know what to do with this kind of thought. They don't want to stop innovation, which is important for us to hear from an art and technological development standpoint, because they understand the benefits that can come out of that. But they also want to be prepared if there's a problem. And so Elon Musk was like, whoa, we need to hold up, because if we create something smarter than us, and then it can create something smarter than it, and it's bad, we're in trouble.
Of course,
And so Elon Musk, this is where we started to see SpaceX come into place, because Elon Musk was like, we need to get out of here. We need to be able to leave Earth when these things take over. Now that to me is kind of simplistic theology and even technological futuristic thinking, because if they're smart enough to take us over here, they're smart enough to follow us wherever we're going. Elon Musk has figured that out. And what he has effectively said is, if you can't beat them, join them. And so what they've come up with is this Neuralink integration, where now we're talking about maybe there's a synthesis that can happen. And this leads to the third part that addresses the question that was asked specifically. So we have escapism theology, we have supremacy theology, and then realistically we have what's called participatory theology. And it's the concept that we're called to actually be part of and engage the technology in a way that can be helpful. And so I think actually what Elon Musk is working towards now gives us the potential capacity for greater thought as we go into thinking about what it might mean to be creative beings. Now, the thing that I've got a lot of publicity for, and particularly a few years back, some kind of international media picked up, and we're having these conversations about what did Musk, and actually someone who's been in these conversations are Bill Gates, Stephen Hawking, and where I gained some notoriety is I suggested from a theological position something of an integration with this technology. And it gives us something to think about as we start to think about who we are, because as we think about who we are, we think about who we and what we can create, right? And I say who and what we can create for an intentional, because we may be creating beings that create art, and that's something for us to consider down the road. So what I suggested from a theological standpoint, and remember, I come from a Christian tradition, but 85+% of the world, articulates belief in theism in some capacity. And so I start kind of in a generalized standpoint and say, look, we are not God. I think most of us will agree to that. But if we're not God and we can agree to that point, and you can buy into a theist position, then you'd say we're not God, but we are God's AI. So we're God's, and what I like to say is alternative intelligence, because there are different forms of intelligence. We have other animals. I give the example of my cat all the time. My cat is sentient, it shows affection. It tells me when it's hungry. And it communicates in its own way, right? So it's alternative intelligence. So we're alternative intelligence. And if you can accept that we're alternative intelligence, I think artificial's not the best term. And particularly when we start looking at virtual worlds and things like that, we tend to use virtual like fake. They're just another expression of who we are as human beings and how we can exist. And so if we can agree that we are AI, then we start to look at all matter, including ourselves, our technology, as we can look at it as divine technology, and we're called to be stewards, caretakers, co-creators of that work of organizing that technology in ways that are positive ways that engage and better humanity and the cosmos. So as we look at that, then it provides these opportunities for creativeness, because we're talking about an engagement of all matter, and that becomes the palette.
So people use the argument for design to signal there is a God when they see beauty in nature. Do you think that art aesthetic is divine?
I think we would talk about beauty, and I think we would link, if there's a God and God is good, and that would be God by definition, I think, and if not, we would be calling it some kind of despot so if God is good, then we'd be linking beauty to that, and then I think we'd have to have a conversation about what beauty is, which is probably a secondary talk, and probably some of your artists have more to say about that than I would even, but that's part of part of the nature of having these kind of conversations is to say, and I would say, my argument is not to signal one thing or the other. It just starts from an iterative point. And I don't claim, particularly with anything I do theologically, that, hey, I've got the answer, because if not, I'd be falling into that supremacy theology piece, right? I'm not running away, but I'm not running away from the questions, because I'd be falling into that escapism theology piece. I'm saying here's an iterative place to go from, and I've based what I've observed based on other people's theology and other people's contributions. And so, where this gets really interesting then is we start to think, if we look at this from a theistic position, so different traditions have a lot to offer as to helping us to conceptualize who we are as beings. And I think us looking at who we are as beings helps us to think about what we are called to do and how we are called to be creators. Now, when I use the word co-creators before, the term you see over my shoulder, what I'm talking about is not that we are equal to God, but we are like a child with their parent co-creating, right? And so, in the example I gave to Sam a while back is I have a 5-year-old. So my 5-year-old colors, and you could objectively argue that I'm better at coloring than my 5-year-old. Yeah. The reality is there's another alternative intelligence right there. So you could argue I'm better at coloring than my 5-year-old, but it doesn't hurt my relationship with my 5-year-old if my 5-year-old becomes a better colorer than me, becomes more creative than me. And so in the Christian tradition, we talk about being made in the image of the kind of in the patriarchal terminology of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. But if we talk kind of more modern terms, the Creator, the Redeemer, and the Sustainer, right? It's the same kind of verbiage, but the concept that there's relationship in the divine in some way. And in Christian theology, it says we are made in the image of that relational being. So why that gets interesting is when we start to think about how we are made, if we are a co-creator, it doesn't jeopardize our relationship. Even if we were to, we could hypothetically become better than what we would consider being currently divine, and it would not hurt our relationship with God. God would still be our creator. God still would be our redeemer. God still would do all these things, but it doesn't put a limit on us. And this is where it gets really interesting when you start looking at this exponential trend, because what can happen is we could be heading towards a place of creativity beyond what we have ever imagined possible before. Yeah. And why that becomes really interesting is because we start to look at who we are and start to say, well, what is the possibility in existence or what we could be? What's it mean to be made in the image of a spirit God, for example, in a digital age where we're meeting, across the world now in a digital environment? If you go into a virtual setting, and Kurzweil talks about some of these things, you go into a virtual setting, you have a virtual embodiment of self. So I have a church world called Church Plus, where we do virtual church services. And so I will stream using OBS software. I think what you're using, right? We use OBS software. Mm-hmm. And you'll see an image of me in 2D while I'm sitting in the present. And then they see a 3D embodiment of me in a digital space in virtual reality. So realistically, I am existing in 3 planes of existence in different creative spaces. That's right? Exciting. We say Father, Son, Holy Spirit, right? In a relational trinity of myself, wow. Very theological. And we start to think about, well, what does that mean for the creative space? Because I'm creating in all those spaces. Wow. I'm creating in this world, I'm creating in that digital space, I'm creating in the virtual space as well. And so you're going to ask something, Sam.
Yeah, I just wanted to talk a little bit about how all these kind of overarching themes we've been touching on tie into the dissertation. You're still working on it, right?
Right.
It's titled "The Eschaton Will Be Technological." Correct.
Yes.
Yeah, talk a little bit. And then for those who don't know, the eschaton is the final event in the divine plan, the end of the world.
Whatever that means. And no one really knows what that means, right? So, my kind of critique of Christianity, I didn't grow up in the church. So I came into Christianity late. I chose that based on kind of the evidence that I deal with. People tell me I'm a little unique because I talk about the intersection of science and technology and theology, and not a lot of people in the tradition have done that throughout history. Now, I would actually say that that's a little bit of revisionist history because the church was very involved in science and technology. We just didn't designate it that way back in the day. But kind of in a modern sense, if we look at everything as being, digital tech in that regard, it has implications for what we can be and what we can do long term. And so if we accept that theological argument that everything is divine technology, then part of what we're looking at is the organizational patterns that we put stuff in, right? And it's possible that these are emerging potentials, that they haven't always existed. People kind of always talk about like Platonic forms and things like that, but it's possible that if God is a creator, we are art embodied in one sense, and we may have various forms of self, like I've talked about, digital, virtual, whatever else is to come about. If you watch sci-fi, it doesn't take much to, you watch a Battlestar Galactica to see a Cylon that looks just like a human being, and there's literally no distinctive difference that you can tell. Because we're looking at, if we start to look at cellular biology as technology, then all of a sudden we start to look at the organizations of matter. And why that gets interesting is that, there are things that happen at the quantum level of matter that we don't have answers about yet. So for example, quantum superposition, it's where you get the example of Schrodinger's cat, right? So a fundamental piece of matter can holds two states at one time. Now, this is something that scientists don't really have their head around, but they can prove that it happens, that it holds, a particle can hold the state of a particle and a wave at the same time. And it's only when it's observed by an observer that it takes one form or the other. So this is kind of like, if you think about this for a second, and this is like, scientists are like, wait, what? And so what that means is we are literally observing our reality into existence, right? So when we observe matter at a fundamental level, it takes a state and we're observing it into existence. So I actually, when I look at the biblical text, for example, we see things that we call miracles, right? We see Jesus heals people, walks on water, calms storms. We're like, what the heck is going on there? I actually think there's a scientific explanation to that. If you could see things in the quantum state, very neo-matrix-esque, right? Where if you look at someone like Vladko Vedral, who's at Oxford, who works with communication theory, all particulate matter can be coded into ones or zeros. So if you could see the quantum possibility that you could observe your reality into existence, well, we see someone who is sick. Jesus sees the quantum reality of someone who is healed and observes that reality into existence. We see a liquid, he sees a solid and observes that reality into existence. We see a storm, he sees peace and the storm subsides. There's a potential for creativity that comes out of our observation of reality and our actualization of that. Now, do we have the ability to observe that into practice at this point? That is a conversation to be had, but I think one of the ways that we observe reality practically into existence is through creation right now. As we create new realities, and we do that artistically, technologically, and as we do that in the various, as we imagine what the future can be theologically, as we imagine philosophically, creatively. And so I think it opens up all these possibilities for people to begin to think about and to dream about as to who we might be, because we actually get to bring a new existence into being.
So the question is, isn't that the crux of creativity, conceptualization and realization?
Yeah, I would say I would even go deeper than that and say it's part of the foundations of who we are created to be. And when we tap into that, we are actually living more fully into what it means to be human, made in the image of a divine creator. Because we talk about all the time, we talk about, and this makes sense, right? In the Christian tradition, you go to church and people say, be like Jesus, right? But we don't actually say what that means, right? And I think it's a far more profound thing to start talking about, superposition and the option to be able to actually observe your reality into existence, and the process of formational being, right? Like, you don't just become an artist overnight and you're able to just paint a fantastic painting right now. There's a process of formation that is involved with that. Now, it may be that formation is the organization of what we call biological material, particulate matter, into a certain organization. You may be able to, AKA the matrix, eventually upload organizational patterns at that. But the question is what are the limits to organizational patterns? And as far as we've been able to observe in science, and if you kind of look at even recent cosmological discoveries, particularly surrounding black holes, multiverse scenarios, realistically, we don't know the end of the possibilities at this point. So I don't think we have to worry about the limitations on us at this point. I think we at this point have the opportunity to move as far forward as we can. The question is are we doing that in a way that is helping humanity to flourish, or something else? And I think that's where, if we're creating, and I would actually ask a fundamental question is art that is fundamentally destructive actually art at that point, right?
And going back to just a question I have, and obviously we don't have the answers for that, especially I think, coming from the perspective of a Christian, I think you have to have a certain amount of humility. There is a certain kind of like inherent humility, saying that like we don't know, but the idea of having like a technological eschaton, what does that look like? Is it really like, does it come like a thief in the night, like in 1 Thessalonians, or does it come like an update overnight while you're plugged in and connected to the Wi-Fi?
Well, they might be both. I don't know about you, but some of my Microsoft updates feel like thieves in the night. But I think one of the things that kind of turned me off about Christianity early on in my life was there was a certain level of authenticity that was missing. And I grew up in the age of televangelists, and I remember being a little kid walking home literally after like kindergarten, walking to somebody who was effectively a babysitter, and seeing that person look at a televangelist online and thinking, as like a 6-year-old or whatever, however old I was, how could somebody believe this stuff? Like this seems so ridiculous to me that, and so I have that critique. Like, there's I think I mentioned to you before, Sam, there's a cartoon of two people sitting on a cloud playing harps, and that's what people view the eschaton as like, and that sounds horrible to me. That's like the worst version of eternity ever. If that's what it is, sign me up for something else, right? Like, but if you're talking about infinite creative possibilities for eternity, that sounds pretty amazing. That's the artist being able to flourish, the technologist being able to flourish, the maker being able to flourish in those circumstances, and being able to be creative. So when we are creating, we are actually tapping into something that's very spiritual about us, something that's foundational about who we were made to be, and to become, because we're not done.
Yeah.
And that's the exciting things about, kind of back to the initial point, is about the potential is we don't just get to be who we are, we get to become into something else, and we get to help develop the things that help us to become those things. So the question then I think becomes is kind of where do our foundations lie? Where do our principles in development lie? And that's why I articulated kind of those 3 levels of theology, because if you buy into supremacy theology, that is not a future that we all have a say in. Yeah. If you are trying to escape our reality, realistically, that's not a future that we all have a say in either. Because I got news for you: if Elon Musk colonizes Mars and AI takes over, most of us are not on the price scale that we get to go with them.
Yeah.
And that's just the reality. But if we're participatory, then we discern in religious communities. We pray, we meditate about what the future is as we create that, and what the value of that is for community together, right? And so, and we kind of do this. If you think about when we reflect on a creation of an artist, there is discernment that happens in the community about what that looks like.
Yeah, and that's a great point to ask this question that I have. And then we're coming close to time, so this has been an awesome conversation. But artists often report the impulse to create to self-actualize. Do you think artists and those who are driven to create are more godlike than others?
I think we all have unique potential based on our context. And I think part of our value is not simply as individuals, because if it was just as individuals, then we're playing into supremacy theology. But it's in this participatory space. You could be an artist and create, and no one could ever see it. The question is, what did you create for? Did you create for you? Did you create in some sense for the divine? That would be a different thing. Because if you acknowledge the divine, then you're never by yourself. Mm-hmm. So you're always in a participatory thing. And then the question is to say how much of that do we do together? You know what I mean? Because there are times, look, in the biblical, and again, I'll use my context, but in the biblical example, there are times when people don't tell these stories about Jesus. Like, there are times when massive amounts of people are coming to Jesus to be healed, and he's like, I got to go away now. And he doesn't heal them. Yeah. He goes to the mountains and he prays, right? Because there's times when he needs to go back to the kind of source of his power at that point. And I think so in art, yeah, go ahead.
No, it's like plugging in to get his source.
That's right. Yeah. So you have to go, and so part of it is and some of that is even as we think about what we do biologically, right? We go to sleep at night because if you stay up too long, your body will start acting like you're drunk. And the reason is it's the reason you reboot your computer every once in a while, right? If we want to draw these parallels between digital matter and whatnot. And part of that is we need time to refresh. There are cycles to what we can do. You don't have machines. I mean, even a machine that can run for what we think is a long time needs a time to power up again, or it needs time to whatever. And so sometimes that refreshment of us comes from being in community as well. I think if we're in isolation too much, I think that we lose some of that sometimes. Now, introverts like isolation, but even introverts have to have community. Extroverts like community, but even extroverts have to have time away from community. Yeah. Right. And so, and if a pandemic hasn't proved that to us, particularly on the introvert piece, then nothing has, right? And so these are the kind of things we have to think about. But I think we have to think about how we get our heads right, so to speak, as we go into developing things. And then I think as we think about what our creative process is, people have different creative processes because as individuals, everyone is unique. And what I would say is one thing, if you don't know what Twitch is, I mean, Twitch is like the biggest streaming platform in the world. It's mostly gamers.
We're streaming on Twitch.
Yeah, so there's 2.2 billion gamers in the world. There's 3.5 billion people on the internet. So there's a ton of gamers, right? And Twitch, people are streaming everything on Twitch at this point, from the presidential event
to
debates. Yeah, to this, NFL games, you name it, it's on there now, right? So you have all of this happening on there. You have this creative space that's happening. And I think as we start looking at the ways that we can express ourselves. Part of what we have to say is how are we as a society honoring people's context. And one thing I would say is that Twitch is a way that we're beginning to monetize that, because people are creative based on their value proposition that people see as a person and as a creator. They come into that space. And so you have someone like Tyler Blevins, who has left and come back and made multi-million-dollar, goes as ninja, right, on Twitch, made like $30 million going to Microsoft, and then they shut down and he came back. Esports is a big thing, but part of it is people just stream and they talk and they have people. I had a friend last night who somebody did gifted them 199 subscriptions to their channel or whatever. Well, that's a bunch of money that somebody just invested in them, and they invested in them because they see value in them. And where's that value come from? It comes from their context, from their experience, from their observation, from their creativity in the world. And so I think what's going to happen is we're going to shift to different models where we start to see the value in people for their context. And it doesn't mean we don't have callings into various fields. We certainly have strengths and giftings in various things, but I think you're going to see more and more technological advancements that starts to lift up individuals because of that contextual background. So anybody watching this should understand that you have a contextual background that makes you unique, and it makes you inherently valuable. And so part of that is tapping into that in a way that resonates in community in a participatory way, so that we can be co-creators with one another and with the divine.
Absolutely brilliant. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Christopher. Do you want to tell the people where they can find you real quick before we sign off?
Yeah, sure. You can find, just if you search Christopher Benek pretty much on any social media, you'll find me. But you can go to ChristopherBenek.com and everything's there, and you can see. And if people are interested in, we have a site. We say it's the world's first theologically informed digital tech magazine called Superposition. It's superpositionmagazine.com, and the reason after this talk as to why we called it that. So there we ask questions of people after we have an article, so that they can have a reality changing observation happen in their life. So it's a way for people to continue to connect with us, and have, if they have questions, to continue to engage with us.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you for coming, everyone. We're going to be live again in
15 minutes. Thank you so much, Christopher, and we really enjoyed this, and we will follow you on Twitch, because we're on Twitch too. So
Awesome.
Blessings
Thank
to you. Bye.